about the importance of open internet and public interest advocacy. And for this day to be sponsored by the Career Development Center, and Feldman is here, which is great. So Kyle and I were particularly excited that James could combine this discussion of the work that Public Knowledge does with the idea of talking about his career path. He's heard a lot about what our Siegel Fellows do, and I know we have other student faculty and staff in here. And our Siegel convenings, we sometimes open to this larger audience as a chance to hear from people that are doing the important work in the world that helps us solve society's most intractable problems, which is what we try to help our Siegel Fellows do. And Gene began his public advocacy career as a staff attorney for Public Citizens Congress Watch. He worked with the Consumer Federation of America for 10 years, was the chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had a focus on antitrust work, and he's been at Public Knowledge for over 10 years.
No, actually 5 years. I went from there to Consumer Reports,
Okay.
and I was in the Justice Department in the first term of the Obama administration in the Antitrust Division, and then I came to Public Knowledge. And I've just done one of the most important things in my career. I've demoted myself from the president and CEO to being senior advisor, and have elevated a new leader who's next generation leader for the organization. So
that's great. Well, when we come back to your career path, we'll hear about that.
Yeah, we're going to go
too. I'll let you introduce yourself more, and then we have plenty of time for folks to introduce themselves. Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me and for taking the time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of what's going on with the internet, but I will put my agenda fully on the table. My path where I am, which I'll come back to later, started with really on-the-job training, coming out of school, going to Washington, not knowing what I wanted to do, but wanting to be involved in policy. And my own experience taught me that it's really important to find ways to create avenues and opportunities for people who want to do public interest work to have an opportunity to come, and I've tried to create on-the-job training environment for people who are interested in that kind of work. So my hidden agenda here is to get the idea in your head for yourselves, for people you know, for people you place in internships, or for thinking about future employment, to consider this kind of work, whether it's subject matter or other, but for those who at least have an interest in checking out Washington, D.C., there are opportunities, and for my organization, we've actually put together, I think, a pretty solid program of mentoring and oversight to where it's actually a pretty good educational model. So that's putting my cards on the table. But before I dig in, I really want to know a little bit more about you, just so I know kind of like whatever you want to say about yourself, just briefly, so I know a little bit about what I should know about your background and why you might even be interested in this. I'll let you do Benny first. But,
That's right. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Benny Goldman. I'm the head of career services there at the Howard School, and I'm happy to be working on the Siegel program on framing this program here. And my interest, we talked about this a little bit before the program started, but there are definitely trends in social justice and international development and across career fields, how technology is influencing how people do their work, how they're the outcomes of their work. And there are students that have expressed interest in how they can use their quantitative skills, or how they can think about the use of technology in their next career iteration. So I think it'll be interesting to hear from your perspective how this looks. So
Great.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm Lanny Eisenberg. I work with the Center for Youth and Communities as a senior program administrator, which is I'm an office support person for the center where the Siegel program is housed. And I am very interested to know, to hear a little bit more. I feel like the internet is very mysterious, and I know that policies are young, if there are any. I don't really know too many. Occasionally on public radio, you hear a little bit about people discussing some issues, and it would just be great to know kind of where's the baseline, and who's maybe who's influencing it or what to look out for and be aware of as you think about consuming internet. Thank you.
I'm Zora Hawk. I am a research associate with the Center for Youth and Communities. Have some involvement with the Siegel program as well in things involving information management and related kind of aspects, but similar to Lanny, I think just broadening my understanding of where things currently stand and where it's come from and what direction things are kind of moving in this space.
Hi, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. My name's Leah. I am a second year Master's in Public Policy and MBA student here, and I'm also a Siegel Fellow. I'm concentrating in children, youth, and families, so connected to a lot of people in this room. I'm really interested in hearing about like the policy side of internet access. I guess a fun fact is that before I started at Heller, I wrote for an education publication called Usable Knowledge. Which is a similar title, but that was about just like making education research like free and accessible. So interested about hearing that kind of idea in different perspectives.
And I'm Susie Flug Silva, the Siegel Program Director, and Leah is representative of our 120 Siegel Fellows that are both here at Heller and Brandeis and across the country. And so David, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself and you want to introduce yourself to folks, that would be great.
Cool. Hi, I'm David Dualde. I am a 2012 Siegel Fellow. I'm doing consulting in electoral politics in New York City. I'm just interested to learn more. I think you guys go ahead.
We broke up a little bit, but your background is in electoral politics. You're in New York now and you're doing consulting. Is that a right summary?
Yep, that's an accurate summary.
A long-time Siegel Fellow. Thanks, Steve.
And we've met before, but I'm Kyle Richard, the program coordinator for the Siegel program. Among the many topics we discussed earlier today, one of the things that I hope to gauge out of this conversation is just to increase my vocabulary and vernacular around the subject.
Hi, my name is Stacey King. I work with the Silverman Center on Philanthropy. I'm from here just to kind of see what Siegel is involved with, so I'm just an attendee, if you will.
I'm Leah Spellberg. I'm a first year MBA student here, and I'm also a part of the Hornstein program, the Master's in Professional Leadership. And I just moved here from DC. I was working for a Jewish nonprofit there, and I was really focused on education about Jewish topics, and I was also interested to know about the impact of the internet through education.
And I'm Kathy Burak, a senior fellow at the Center for Youth and Communities and part of the Siegel program leadership team. And it's, I think about the internet as a source of powerful good and powerful evil. And I think I'm trying to get a grasp of the scope of both of those, the continuum.
Great. Okay, this is really helpful for me. Thank you. So I don't want to do too much substance digging in on the internet, but I'll do a little framing, and then we can do topical things that come out of it. So it is mysterious, and nobody knows. It is invisible in most respects to us, except for the devices that we hook up to and that are now almost with us all the time. If you think about it, from smartphone across to laptop and connected televisions and cabinets, what else? Connected homes. And so I won't dwell on all the positive things. We know there are a lot of practical things that happen, but what to me is fascinating about the internet age is that we're seeing, as these services develop and as people are finding new uses, that there are a few companies that are tending to dominate in this space. For social networking, it's obviously Facebook. I mean, it has more than 2 billion users. For search, it's Google. It has more than 90% of the market for search, and has developed this way. Increasingly, people are wondering about whether Amazon is taking over the retail world. Not clear that it's that far along. But this is not totally surprising when you look at the fundamentals of how the internet works. The invisible part, I'll try to just make visible by giving characteristics. With networks, whether you're thinking of the electric system or the old telephone wire system, railroads, whatever, there are these enormous benefits of connecting more places and more people because there are more places you can go, there are more things you can do, there are more ways of getting around. Almost all networks have a characteristic of being kind of high cost to invest in, but then once you've got there, to add on new people, new places, new services, costs decline, economies of scale with a lot of networks. What is most unique about the internet as a set of networks that come together when certain companies seem to be most popular is there's a new form of power that is our data. Now, data has always been powerful in many different ways in our society, but these devices are constantly gathering data on us, not just what you write and what you say, but GPS, where you are, what your movements are. And so inherently in this, there's a whole new set of information being gathered. It can be applied for good, but not necessarily. And what's most interesting about this to me is that for anything you're thinking about, interested in, so in educational setting, and take it all the way back to probably pre-K now, there's a lot of technology that is absolutely essential to be functional. And everything you think of as inherent class or structural or socioeconomic differentiations in society can probably be exacerbated by the fact that the technology has become so essential. Now, some of it maybe could be overcome if you apply policy tools to try to get there, but it's not automatic in a marketplace sense. So almost every element of education is implicated that way. Farming is no longer just about what herbicides, what pesticides to apply, what you know about your fields or whatnot. Almost all farms are now internet connected with massive data flows, basically triggering when you irrigate, when you apply fertilizer, pesticide, whatever. It's unbelievable. Healthcare, you can't go to a doctor without someone being in front of the screen, or a hospital or an emergency room, or whatnot. Just go on down the line. The deliveries that come to your home, information that's gathered about all of us then ends up in an insurance system. Not always used for the most progressive purposes. Housing databases, similarly not always used for the best progressive. So you can go down the line here, our banking, all of this is, the digital economy is now driven by internet connected services and devices. And what's to me most problematic about it is, in a sense, is that, okay, it's markets, things evolve, we've had this happen a million times in every age, but we have no public oversight mechanisms for this whole process. And I don't know if this is obvious to you, but let me walk through it for a second. In the area of agriculture, we have the agriculture department. You probably have all kinds of state and local agencies in farm areas. Housing, you have local housing oversight authorities, and you have all the way up to HUD. And go down the line, HHS for healthcare, all our markets, financial institutions, a zillion regulatory agencies, the Securities and Exchange Commission. You go through all of this, communications, your cable, your telephone, even your broadband, there's a Federal Communications Commission. There is no internet commission of any sort. And the internet is now fundamentally taking apart traditional sectors. Banking in many parts of the world is now an online transaction process, and countries are scrambling to figure out how to get banking regulatory oversight over something that's done through Facebook or through some app that appears on some device It's an unregulated device and probably an unregulated service. So it's fundamentally transforming every area that I think you can identify, you can challenge me on it, that you would call important to social justice, that we've traditionally thought of markets not serving well and automatically because of structural problems and inequalities in our society, and we've needed policy to intervene, and we don't have the policy tools. We don't have even the place to go to push for certain policy tools. And what's happening now is, as a few companies are becoming more dominant, it's becoming clear we could have a monopoly problem for search or for social networks, or possibly more for what will happen in online retailing. And people are turning to antitrust and saying, do we break them up? Is there a violation of the law? And there could be, and that there are pieces of this, that there's some policy tools there. But for the basics of what is equity, what is fair, that's not what antitrust is about. Antitrust is just about, like, have you broken the law and tried to monopolize, or have you held somebody out of the market? It's a very limited tool. We don't have any of the other kind of tools that are there. And you have everyone scrambling around this. So in my world of Washington, D.C. public policy, this is really problematic. And it's creating kind of the basis of the work that my organization is now focused on. So a little bit about public knowledge. This was an organization created about 15 plus years ago, focusing on technology, and then it was intellectual property, the rights of fair use of users versus rights holders, and telecommunications issues were very prevalent, and there's a lot of work on how technology and telecommunications creates both opportunities to have broadband everywhere and then lots of inequality. So there's been work on things like lifeline programs, subsidies for low-income people, subsidies for rural areas where costs are higher, a lot of work against mergers of dominant companies that could control both our telecommunications network and broadband. A fair amount of work done on adjacent issues like cable companies and media companies, and whether we're allowing too few companies to control communications in that space. And it is now evolved into this, well, what about Google, Facebook, and Amazon, Apple, Twitter, others? Is there a need for some oversight? So the kind of work that my organization has traditionally done is look for whether there are laws that need to be adjusted, regulations called for, updates in policy, and then connecting with a broader community of local activists, national networks of activists, underserved communities, because a lot of our focus has been on social equity issues within this space. And we're now starting to do that with what to do about these large internet companies. So how did I get there? It's a funny path. So I was, and I can do as much personal history as you like, but basically coming out of high school, I had a chance to study abroad, and it was during the Vietnam War, and I was randomly placed in a country called Denmark, which was a fascinating place to be because it was very anti-Vietnam War, and it was a highly functional social welfare state. And as a high school kid coming out of Tennessee, it was eye-opening to me to see a place that was providing free healthcare, free education, had low unemployment, unbelievable standard of living, what appeared to be very little inequality. It was very homogeneous too. So that's a huge advantage, I guess you could say, for advantages. But it was just eye-popping because where I grew up, it was America's the greatest country in the world. So this got my whole framework going about studying political theory and political science. I got a law degree because it was just a good thing to get. And I plopped into Washington, D.C. right at the time, thinking I'm going to do work on impact litigation around justice issues when Ronald Reagan becomes president. And I get this job at Public Citizen Congress Watch. I had no idea what it was, not paid very well. I was told you're going to be a public interest advocate. And it was fascinating. And this is where my interest in training and on the job kind of apprenticeship models. Because I was around some people who had just a few more years of experience than I, who would just take me through the process of how do you try to influence policymakers in Washington when you have no constituency, you have no money to give out to people, you have no ostensible power. Your only power is the power of ideas and how you apply those ideas in the policy process. So I had to work on saving a law to prohibit paying bribes to foreign governments to earn business contracts, called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And it was me against the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce. That was my first test. Then I was told we have to fight for a variety of social programs. They were cutting legal services. They were cutting food stamps. They were cutting Medicaid. They were cutting everything. And I was part of coalitions and trying to figure out, I had to figure out everything from how the Farm Bill works, because that's where food stamps was, to the Legal Services Corporation and a whole variety of other programs. Then our telephone monopoly was broken up by the government, and so that should be my issue. So I went through this whole thing. I had to learn telecommunications, and I had to learn media. I had to learn Social Security. Social Security was running out of money, and to me, this was like the most unbelievable set of experiences where I could dabble with my own ideas and try to figure out how to get engaged in policy with people around me who had some experience and could take me along and get me into things. And it was all trial and error. But I've testified in Congress more than 200 times. I've got to argue a few cases in court. I've done all kinds of regulatory filings. I've worked with all kinds of coalitions. I've worked with all kinds of people and companies who I would never want to be in a social setting with. But because for some crazy reason, they agreed with what I believed in for their own self-interested, corporate, or whatever reason, I ended up on the same side of an issue with them. And it's been just a fascinating set of experiences, getting the ability to dabble in a whole lot of these areas, then having to really develop expertise in some, and constantly have to question, why am I doing this and not that? Why should I put my time into this and not that? I don't have anyone dictating to me what I do. It's how do you make change? How can you have impact in this environment? And I have made a million mistakes and I've tried all kinds of different things, but I've learned constantly along the way. And after doing that on this whole variety of issues, I then get the opportunity to work as chief counsel of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee for Senator Metzenbaum from Ohio, who's this great champion of the left in the 80s and early 90s. And I come with these experiences, and the first thing I get thrown into is the crime bill. And I had to learn new things because we were the authors of the Brady bill to limit weapon purchases and the ban on assault weapons. And so when you hear Joe Biden say he was the guy behind all of this, not so much. He was there. He was part of it. But my boss, Senator Metzenbaum, was the original sponsor. So I got thrown into all of that and had to learn it. Then I went back out and I worked. So I worked for every kind of consumer organization and different kinds of nonprofits across all these issues. And then ultimately ended up getting a chance to work in the Justice Department in the Obama administration. Because I had done antitrust as part of this whole thing, set of experiences. I got brought in to be one of the top deputies for the head of the antitrust division, and so I had 3.5 years working on antitrust in the Justice Department. It's fascinating. So I come out of that, and now in working at another nonprofit, I'm mostly trying to think about how does the next generation get a chance to do what I was just lucky enough to get the chance to do. And, you know, and I'm the first to say it's not for everybody. I've known a lot of people who are smart, brilliant, much smarter than I am, who after trying something like this said, this is not for me, I'm getting out of here. I can't deal with these people. I can't do this kind of work. But I've seen a lot of people come through our program and learn to do it and take to it and really have, you know, wonderful career opportunities coming out of it. And a lot of it ends up being not in Washington, but that this is a piece of, you know, a kind of a step along the way towards really learning a whole lot about how to be persuasive and how to influence policymakers, and then taking those skills to something else. So that's my story, and I don't want to keep talking. So what I really want to do is turn back to you. So if there's any particular issues around digging in on the internet, or any particular issues even about like the whole idea of skill development and training that you want to come back to.
I have a question.
Sure.
For, you're kind of saying that there's no internet commission.
Mhm.
Are there, do you know if if there is kind of a mandate or something happening where the different factions are kind of focusing on the internet at all? Like, do they have an overlying?
Yeah. So it's a real hodgepodge. So I you know, a couple of things I probably should raise that are really important here. When I talked about data, what I didn't say was privacy. Obviously, that is one of the key issues that comes out of all this. With all that data being gathered about us, we have some healthcare privacy laws that can be applied to the internet. We have some banking privacy laws that can apply to the internet. But we don't have anything for what Facebook is doing most of the time, or what Google is doing most of the time, and on down a whole variety of things. So we have huge gaps. We don't have a privacy law in the US. We have some vague rules that the Federal Trade Commission can apply that, believe it or not, are all based on what industry says its practices are and whether they live up to them. So when you see Facebook fined $5 billion, it's for violating their own commitments. It's not for some rule about how they have to treat our data. It's their own commitment. And if you have terms of service and a company promises we will not share your data with blah, 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 and then you find out that they do, the Federal Trade Commission can deal with that because they made a commitment to you and they're not honoring it. But it's not a set of rules. So another area, artificial intelligence. So without digging into detail, you know, and analytics here, I mean, it's nothing all that complicated other than massive amounts of data on us and predictive tools to try to understand how, based on what we know about what we do, say, prefer, like, whatever, you can kind of know the next thing, or what someone will want, or what someone will prefer, or whatnot. And this is everything from like when you start typing in a word and all of a sudden it appears either the correct word or the wrong word, right? It's some predictive tools that are put together. That is kind of artificial intelligence, but it's being used in everything. And so it's being used to help develop automatic self-driving cars. Because if you know something about how people drive and what they do, you can kind of figure out the logic of this. It's being used for surgery and go on down the line. But it's also being used for insurance policies and who gets a higher premium, who gets a lower one, and everything you can think of that might be discriminatory. Who gets into what schools, how to grade things. And so it can be an unbelievably convenient tool based on knowledge, and it can be something that can be very misapplied. It's being used in the prison system for all kinds of repetition of what are probably fundamental injustices about how we incarcerate. And so people are trying to unpack that and do it in each area where they think there's a relevant law that connects it. So some of this is obviously our civil rights laws. And people are now trying to figure out how to apply that in the use of algorithms artificial intelligence, machine learning, and big data. But there are a lot of gaps too, and we don't know, it's not, and so can you imagine yourself in, you know, a housing authority, let's say, and you're really committed to trying to prevent discrimination. You don't know anything about the internet or algorithms, but your entity or your agency or your contractors are saying, here's a computer program that will help you do the 10 things you need to do. And this is happening in every profession all along. And again, a lot of it for very good purposes, but also a lot of things that are can either be inadvertently manipulated or that are purely repeating structural inequities or biases. And for a lot of people doing the functional work, they don't know how the mechanics work. They wouldn't know how to take that apart and even assess whether it's biased or not, discriminatory or not. So we have a huge bit of catch up to do with public accountability of some sort. Now, a lot of the companies involved in this are not totally nefarious. They don't want to be known as, Google doesn't want to be known as a bad company. Probably Facebook either, although they make a lot of mistakes. But they don't, the entire way the internet grew up and the way the digital economy grew up is kind of a matter of experimentation. And it's the Silicon Valley way of doing things. It's been unbelievably successful. You just try things and you keep adjusting it. You know, in newsrooms now, people are putting out articles that never would have been put out before because they had to be edited and curated and carefully managed and whatnot. Now it's like speed is this, but you know, we'll change it in an hour. We'll correct it. And so we have a whole different way in which we have changed our standards of what is quality. And, you know, what is a good enough product to put forward or service or whatnot. And all of that is happening, and this is very, very much the way the internet itself grew and had a lot of wonderful attributes, but now we're seeing tremendous negative sides. The other piece of this, I think, is important, is disinformation versus good information. And this is a huge conundrum as well, because what happens in the internet economy, and you see this with newspapers dying day in and day out, local communities and the news business being in trouble, is that with these tools, you're now able, as an advertiser who used to just buy ad space in the newspaper, or people who would list things in classified ads, buy display ads or whatnot, and you think of television and radio this way as well. You were doing it in a product that was a whole set of information packaged together as a product, a newspaper, a bunch of articles, a TV news show, 30 minutes of programming, you know, on down the line. What's now happening is, because we can understand from data something that you might be interested in reading or knowing about, there'll be an effort to find information that fits that, and then an advertiser who will want to buy something adjacent to your visual to try to convince you to purchase something. If you're interested in traveling to Spain and you're reading an article about Spain, there might be somebody who wants to, you know, promote travel plans or airfares or whatnot. And this goes on, and what it does is it disaggregates all information into little bits and pieces. It can be extremely efficient and targeted, but it kind of takes away the notion of what was credible and branded from what is just something called information. And a lot of people are taking advantage of this, and countries are taking advantage of this to spew out things. You have no idea if it's fact or fiction. And we are scrambling, and the company's scrambling, but we don't have a set of rules or guidance for this in our society. And I think this is one of the most frightening things. It's very, very hard to know. So these are all these offshoots that we've got like to grapple with.
It's like bread and water.
Mhm.
It's like the genie's been out the bottle. I do have a question about the advertising piece, is because I would imagine a company or companies like Facebook and Google make their revenue mostly off
type of incentive do they have to capture information, or at least say, well, let us give you more tools to manage your information so that you set the permission. We'll still use it, but you tell us how much.
We're seeing a lot of this. People are getting freaked out as the companies are trying to adjust to it. They're coming up with tools, and of course they want their users to be doing it themselves. They don't want to be responsible. And they're trying to come up with things, but you'll see over and over again, every one of these things, unless there's pressure on them, is certainly not to reduce their bottom line profits, and certainly not to change their business models. Because you could say, wait a minute, you can't just put that information out there. Someone's got to verify that it's factual or real or not, not just propaganda or incendiary or whatnot. But that would mean a kind of a filter on information flow. And we usually don't do that. So we don't want the government doing that as a matter of censorship. But so we're grappling with all these things that, again, they just kind of like, well, we built it, it grew, and this is what it is. It's this organic thing. Now you look at it, there's so many negative externalities. There's so many implications that you can improve. So this is an environment of a whole need to take, I think, people who do know that technology, and I'm not asking you to be that, I'm not really that either, but apply your kind of social justice frame with these technical tools and people who have these skills, and it needs to be combined because you could say for a lot of social justice movement, there was always obviously a need for activists, right? People on the street, people on the ground, people protest. There probably was always a need for lawyers because you're going to sue some people for violating certain laws, right? Would have always been good to have economists to do some. You can go through different functions, right? Now we need technologists too, and we need engineers. We need people like that. And it needs to be this combined effort for whatever you want to define as your realm of social justice and public interest work. Yes.
So I felt the idea of like breaking up these monopolies is something people talk about, and I have those this morning, I have a plan for that. But it sounds like you're talking about sort of a preliminary step of creating like an internet commission. Do you like foresee or hope like one of the like products of that to be to break up these monopolies, or do you think that like, we just need this regulation and then we'll
it could be both. So there's and part of it is because I don't think, number one, at least unless you change the laws, breakups are really hard to accomplish under our law, and they're very strict standards. And with the courts as conservative as they are today, you're not going to get a very extensive reading of the antitrust laws for breaking up big companies. So there are a huge number of problems of just even trying to do that, and it takes years as well. But I think a lot of the problems I'm describing are pretty inherent, whether it's even 1 or 2, 3 companies, or whether it's 8 or 10 or 20 companies. It's not just a matter of competition. It's more fundamental to the business incentives in these markets. I mean, everybody who benefits from data is not going to want to give you privacy. Whether it's 1 company or 20 companies, they're going to have a race to get the better data to beat the others in the marketplace. So there are a lot of things, there are other tools we need. And this isn't that surprising. I mean, this is why we have generic laws like civil rights laws and other non-discrimination laws in our society, because we don't trust markets to deliver it, even if they're fully competitive. So we need that in this space, but we need to understand how we can do it. Another layer of reason for thinking about like an agency, or again, I'll just call it a place of public accountability, is that my entire experience with Congress, you see it from a different vantage point, it's an unbelievably messy place. It's a lot of people who don't have skills and expertise, who spend all their time fundraising, and whether they do their jobs well or not, there's no way they have the time to monitor these kinds of things. And almost every other sector in our past, we've had these expert agencies that you would hand things over to, and they would be responsible to Congress. And there'd be hearings, and there'd be reports, and there'd be, their funding depends on whether they do a good job, or it's perception. And so we don't have the internal workings of government. And like for artificial intelligence, I think we probably need something even bigger in government, which is a repository of skills and knowledge that can go across areas, because this is going to be used everywhere in society. And if you're always chasing the private sector rather than understanding in real time what's going on, you can have a really huge problem. And the government itself procures all kinds of products and services to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. And so they can drive markets. They can refuse to deal with contractors who won't meet certain kinds of non-discrimination standards or equitable standards. But they have to understand what those are to actually even use that power of government. So we've got a huge amount of catch up to do. Agencies are all doing it idiosyncratically, like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is trying to figure out how to regulate self-driving cars. And there probably are a lot of attributes there that fit with, you know, a traditional metal car. But there are a lot of things that don't. And so they're grappling with that, but every part of government is. So these are huge gaps we have. So it's a different, trying to add a different layer and lens on, as you think about social justice, we're going to have to put it into this. This is our marketplace. The digital market is exploding.
Well, we really appreciate you bringing the social justice lens to these issues and your own personal career story. I know that we only have about 2 or 3 minutes left before our session is done, but I just wanted to see if any of the other students or David just has to sign off, but this was very fascinating. Did you have any questions?
You touched a little bit on misinformation, and I think that's what a lot of work that I was focusing on was about misinformation and miseducation of topics. Can you speak a little bit about what's being done to kind of go against that?
Well, I mean, so now there's a huge amount of money coming from philanthropy to fund a lot of educational institutions and a lot of other think tanks and nonprofits that are trying to play catch up here and identify this and use the tools of machine learning, big data to identify where traffic is driven from bots, basically through machines, through just repetitive restatement of things rather than individuals all kind of curating information themselves. Try to find sources where, you know, there's not really any fact checking. So a lot of that's going on. A lot of the news business is trying to do that too. You know, I actually think a lot of kids intuitively are much more both facile with all the apps and the equipment, but also with a kind of recognition that you just can't automatically trust everything because it's a way of you grow up with that in your own world, but not systematically. And so we're really kind of chasing our tail on this. But you know, if you think about it, how you can be, other than knowing something comes from a branded source that you trust, how you can find something on the internet and feel confident that it is accurate, it's not an easy task. So we have a lot to do.
Well, if I could throw out the last question, you talked about your own learning through doing in DC, and you've had fellows in and interns in a number of different places that you've been. What is many of our fellows have been in DC, many of our SIGO fellows are in DC. When your fellows start off at the beginning of the year, the summer, whatever they're with you, what's one piece of advice that you always throw out to people that you think they don't know about being in DC or trying to make a difference in DC?
I think it's initiative. It's don't be afraid of what you don't know. That learning by trial and error is totally legit and appropriate. You don't have to be an expert in anything. That there's so much about the policy process that is more art than science, and that is really best under, I mean, I could not, I've got more than 35 years of doing this, I could not write an article, let alone a book, on what the tools are. I mean, I can probably list a bunch of them, but I would look at it and say, this is meaningless. They're going to put you into a situation. We have to go through, like, what's the logic of how you try to figure out how to be persuasive and how to solve a problem. So it's the kind of intuitive things that I think all come from, you know, don't be afraid of just taking your own initiative and experimenting in the policy realm. You can't be wrong.
Well, with that, we just want to say thank you so much.